Hello, everybody. Hope everybody had a good lunch and is super excited for what I like to refer to as the nap session. We've got full bellies, it's been a bit of a long day. We can go and sit in a quiet, dark room and have a nap. And the great thing is these lights are really bright, so I can't actually see all of you having a quiet sleep. So as long as you don't snore, I'll have no idea. So for those of you who aren't going to have a nap over the next hour, this afternoon I am here to talk to you about accessibility. The world we live in relies more and more on technology for our everyday lives, and we as creators of that technology face an important responsibility to ensure that we're not excluding those around us who want to use what it is that we're creating. And I want to start with a very great quote by Tim Berners-Lee, which is, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." So what does it mean to make things accessible, and what does that mean for us? It means when we create technologies, whether that's software, hardware, or something else, it means that anybody can use and interact with it using whatever means they prefer, given whatever capabilities they have. It means that the internet, the technologies, the solutions that we're creating are made for everyone and with everyone in mind. But how is that relevant to us here today? And why is accessibility important? For better or worse, the people who design the touchpoints of society determine who can participate and who is left out, often unwittingly. This is a quote by Kat Holmes in the book Mismatch: How Inclusion Shapes Design. All of us here today are in a very important position, one to make a difference to the people around us. We have the power to make things better for those around us, to decide who is able to participate and who is left out. We can all make a difference in people's lives. Let's just for a second ignore that we shouldn't be excluding people, that accessibility is a right moral thing to do. What else does accessibility and inclusion do for us? A study in 2018 by the Disability Council of Australia found that inclusive teams and workplaces were 10 times more likely to be highly effective. They were 9 times more likely to be innovative. They were 4 times more likely to provide an excellent customer experience. They were 4 times more likely to stay at a company. And they were 19 times more satisfied with their jobs. Now, I understand that this is also an Australian study, and I'm not in Australia right now. I'm in Norway. However, I'm pretty sure every time they do the Global Happiness Index, Norway's happier anyway. So surely this would make you even happier if we make sure that we're including people and being accessible. But again, accessibility is a basic human right. We are seeing drastic changes to legislation and regulations around accessibility and inclusion. And countries all over are ensuring their laws are up to date with technology as it becomes more intermingled with our day-to-day lives. So it's no longer a case of if, but when we're going to be legally required to make sure what we build is accessible. And the secret is, it's much easier to do that from the beginning. It's easier to make changes and improvements now as we build things, to include it from the very beginning rather than trying to stick a band-aid on it later. How many of you know if what you're currently building is accessible? Do you know if it's something you're currently doing Is it something you're working towards? Is it something you're at least talking about? Every inaccessible web page tells people with an impairment, you aren't welcome in this world. If you don't know whether your website or app is accessible, it's not. Start learning. This is a quote from a tweet by Loren Legasic, who's an accessibility engineer and consultant based in Australia. And this is about, the context behind this tweet was her father is blind and was a bit fed up with the fact that he couldn't go a few days without needing help to use the internet. If you don't know whether or not you're doing it right, you're probably not. But it's not too late to make a change, to start making improvements, and to make sure that everybody who uses your product feels like they're welcome. So who are these people that benefit from accessibility? Who benefits when we make our products and experiences accessible? When we think of accessibility, we often think of people with permanent impairments. It could be someone who is blind or deaf, someone who is in a wheelchair, or someone who is missing use of a limb. And the World Bank estimates that these people with permanent impairments, are at least 15% of the global population. That's over 1.2 billion people. And these are just people with what we refer to as permanent impairments, which are a small subset of people with impairments. Permanent impairments are ones that are not likely to be resolved. They are long-term, like a missing or non-functioning limb. There are also people with temporary impairments. These can't be resolved quickly, but they may resolve in the short to long term. For example, someone with a broken arm. And finally, we have situational impairments. Situational impairments, which are a result of the environment alone and can be resolved by leaving it. For example, holding a small child or a pet. All three of these examples result in somebody who has limited to no use of a limb, but they have different impacts on our everyday life. Although not all impairments are permanent, and they may not have as great an impact, they can all be made easier by accessibility improvements that we make. These impairments are then split into one of four categories. Hearing, where they have impaired, limited, or no hearing in one or both ears. Vision, where they have impaired, limited, or no vision, and can include conditions like colour blindness or glaucoma. Mobility, where they have impaired, limited, or no movement, or control of movement, which can include conditions like arthritis or Parkinson's, which affect fine motor control. Lastly, we have cognitive impairments, which includes anything that impacts how information is processed and includes a wide range of conditions such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism, limited language proficiency, migraines, epilepsy, and more. So again, we ask, who benefits from accessibility? Taking into account permanent, temporary, and situational impairments, considering impairments that impact hearing, vision, mobility, and cognition, who are we helping by making things accessible, and who are we excluding by not? Every single one of us has at some point, or will at some point, benefit from an accessibility improvement. When we make things accessible, everybody benefits. I mean, think about the last time you avoided taking the stairs and used a lift or a ramp instead. I want you to have a think about whether or not you know anybody or you yourself have ever experienced a broken arm or hand. Perhaps you've had an ear infection and had limited hearing in one or both ears. Or a migraine. Perhaps your first language is not the language you use most of the time. Or perhaps you have dyslexia. Or somebody who's in a loud environment, like a crowded expo hall. Have you ever tried to use your device outside where there's glare on the screen? Do you know anybody who uses glasses? These are very bright lights, but I am very aware of the fact that there is at least 3 people in the audience who are wearing glasses here today. Maybe you know somebody who is colorblind, or with ADHD, or autism. Somebody who has epilepsy. Maybe you've tried to use an old browser or device, or used reading mode, or a small screen. Maybe you've tried to use slow internet, like conference Wi-Fi that is not built for thousands of developers trying to use the internet all at the same time, or actually all of the internet in Australia. Maybe you've ever tried to use a device while holding a child or pet. Have you ever tried to multitask? Have you ever used a virtual assistant or AI? Have you ever had carpal tunnel? Have you ever tried to watch video and discovered you didn't have headphones and you didn't want to be that person on the train? Have you ever tried to use a device and discovered that you've got really big fingers, or just regular sized fingers, but the button's really, really small and close together? Maybe you use night shift mode on your device, or found you have limited fine motor control. Maybe you're just really easily distracted about what's going on. These are all examples of situations and conditions where people can benefit from accessibility. And I challenge you to tell me that you don't know a single person in your life that has not, at one point in time, met one of these criteria. So, why is this my responsibility? Why is this your responsibility? We've established the fact that everybody benefits if we do better, but why in particular is this up to us? No matter where you sit in a company, where you sit in a project or product life cycle, we all play a part in ensuring that what technology being built is accessible. You may be in company leadership, might be managers and team leaders, recruitment teams, human resources, project managers, product owners, marketing and content writers, designers, developers, QA and testers, DevOps, or security. I know this may not be everyone in the room, but if you don't fit into one of those roles, please come and find me afterwards. I'd love to have a chat about how you can help as well. But for these roles, let's have a look at how we can make a difference. Start off at the top, company leadership. From the top down, company leadership and decision makers have the ability to make sure that accessibility and inclusion are part of your company's goals, policies, and core values. And anybody in the audience that has a boss, I highly recommend you take a photo of this right now, and you can go back and see, you can go back to work and say, see, this should be a part of our goals and values. Anybody who's involved in hiring decisions can make sure that accessibility skills are prioritized and looked for when hiring new team members. That includes hiring experts in accessibility as well as hiring people that have an interest and want to make a difference. Take a look at the skills assessments that you're giving new staff during the hiring process. And if someone is being hired as an accessibility expert, someone who's just going to be working on the front end as a specialist, do they need to be answering questions about complex computer science algorithms? Just have a think about that. As well as hiring new people, we can make sure that existing team members have the skills as well. So organising and prioritising accessibility training so that everyone understands their responsibilities. It could be something as simple as encouraging them to watch this talk afterwards. You know, subtle plug. We've talked about regulations and legislation around accessibility and how important that it's very important that company leadership understand what these are and how they can impact the company. As it changes, they need to be made aware of what applies to them and what they need to do to ensure they're compliant, ideally staying ahead of the curve to make it easier for the teams implementing it. We talked about the advantages of having an inclusive workplace, and it's important to make sure that policies and procedures reflect this from the very beginning when hiring new team members all the way through. So much of building accessible products comes from having teams with a diverse range of views and experiences, and when the workplace is inclusive, it makes it's much easier to build and maintain that. Too many products don't have the accessibility discussion early on, and it's much harder to make changes down the track. So when accessibility is talked about from the beginning of a project or included in the roadmap from the start, it's easier to make it happen the whole way through the process. It's also important to make sure that accessibility is included in the definition of done or your project scope so that it's not forgotten about. As well as including it in the scope, it's important that a plan for testing exists. Where possible, including accessibility user testing by people with lived experience. For example, screen reader testing by screen reader users, which we're going to touch on a little bit later. This is one of my favourite ones. Anyone know what this means? Avail oneself of unostentatious vernacular. Unless absolutely necessary, don't overcomplicate it. Ensure content is written at a level that can easily be understood regardless of education level or language proficiency. Wherever information is being conveyed through images, videos, audio, and other non-text formats, provide a text alternative. Make sure it's being provided in the form of a transcript, caption, description, or similar. And most importantly, make sure that the text alternative can be accessed and consumed by assistive technology such as a screen reader. Make sure that there's enough contrast between text and background colors so that it can be easily read by everyone. This is especially important when text is over the top of a background image or a video, as it can be difficult to read. I'm sure everyone here at some point has tried to look at a web page with like light grey text on a white background. It's ridiculous. Sorry, 2 workshop days and then fun at a conference. Not good for my speaking voice. Make sure that your font is of an adequate size. No hiding teeny tiny writing. Most of the time you want to have a base font size of 16 pixels. Make sure that you have clear hover and focus state for any clickable and interactive elements. This is one of the places where it's really important that both design and development are involved. Designers can make sure that we keep it in line with everything else and on brand. developers to implement it. This includes making sure that you're not just relying on a subtle color change that might be missed. You can make it noticeable and obvious while still keeping it on brand. Ensure there is clear and understandable errors. This is very important so that people understand what is happening and what's gone wrong. Anybody ever tried to fill in a form and you got no idea what the error said? Anybody tried to do that with a form that they built and therefore it's their fault? Yeah. This also means making it obvious so people with vision impairments can easily find the error, and it's recognised and announced by screen readers and assistive technology. Animations, motion, and autoplay videos can be an issue for a number of reasons. It can distract and switch focus from the content. It can trigger motion sickness in really severe cases and can trigger seizures in people with epilepsy. This doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use animations, but it's important to make sure that they're not in your face and distracting. There are also ways that developers can check for people's preferences and disable animations if they've opted out. One of the best things that developers can do is to use correct semantic HTML elements when building out the structure of their content. This includes additional functionality, context, and information out of the box is compatible everywhere and easy for assistive technologies to consume and understand. So literally, developers in the room, if you take one thing away from here, it's to go and make sure you're using semantic HTML. It fixes like 90% of the issues. Not everybody uses a mouse to navigate around. A lot of people find it's easier to use a keyboard or other input device. And for people with vision impairments, they can't see where the cursor is on a page, but a keyboard allows them to navigate around functional elements. For people with a mobility impairment, they may not have fine motor control needed to use a mouse or trackpad, so again, find it's easier with a keyboard. Accessibility has options for both manual and automated testing. Manual testing includes checking things such as keyboard navigation and screen reader compatibility, and automatic testing can capture things like color contrast, HTML validation, and text alternatives. It's really good to have a combination of both manual and automated tests to make sure that you're catching everything. And for the automated tests that are written, it's good to have them integrated as part of a pipeline or process so they run automatically as part of the rest of the testing suite. Because if we don't automate a test to run every time, is it going to happen? No, probably not. Although it is useful for people building the product to ensure that it's fully tested, there are some things that are best done by people with lived experience. So where possible, have people with impairments test what you're building, whether that's by hiring an external company or consultant, or ensuring that you have these people on the team. Security. This is a fun one. When developing security policies, make sure that you are remembering the people who are involved. When procedures are convoluted or unclear, it makes it much easier for people to be susceptible to social engineering. And people with cognitive impairments in particular are at a higher risk for this because they may miss some signs. Autofill functionality and password managers are especially useful for people with impairments. When these features are disabled, it makes it more likely that someone will accidentally enter confidential information to an insecure field, or people may resort to using third-party solutions to help them, which introduces additional risks of their data being compromised. And lastly, when using multi-factor authentication, consider people's capabilities. Some people may struggle to access and enter the code before it times out, so don't make the timeout too short. And be wary when receiving an SMS code. Sometimes screen readers won't recognise or announce the difference between upper and lowercase letters, so consider whether or not it needs to be case sensitive or use a numeric code alone. Let's have a look at some hard data. We're in the nap session, everyone's nicely relaxed. Let's have a look at some data. Let's look at the numbers. What does accessibility mean in terms of numbers? A study done by Microsoft and Forrester looked at users with impairments who abandon online purchases due to accessibility issues. The study estimates that an average European company with a website that gets 1 million views per day, if they made their website accessible and therefore people with impairments didn't abandon the checkout process, they could increase their revenue by an additional 2.3 million euros every year. And that's just Europe. Earlier, we looked at 15% of the global population with an impairment. That's 1.2 billion people in the world with a permanent impairment. These people can make a big difference to your bottom line if they're able to use your product. Forbes has estimated that these people are responsible for $13 trillion of disposable income every year. That's $13 trillion of additional income up for grabs if you make sure that your product is accessible. So how many accessibility issues are we talking? Each year, a not-for-profit organisation called WebAIM, Web Accessibility in Mind, do a study on the top 1 million homepages. So it's not the whole website, homepage, the top 1 million homepages on the internet. And in 2025, from those 1 million websites, they found 50,960,288 accessibility issues. That's an average of almost 51 errors per website on the homepage alone. And of those 1 million websites, 94.8% failed to meet accessibility guidelines. That means that almost 95% of them were built without considering the billions of people who need accessibility features to use them. This audit was also done using automated testing and therefore not able to test the criteria. So the number of inaccessible websites is very likely higher. Another reason to consider accessibility is the European Accessibility Act, which comes into effect in June this year. This applies to ICT products and services and includes websites, apps, software, hardware, and more. And although Norway isn't technically a member of the EU, it doesn't apply. However, if your company has any clients who are based in EU countries, you'll still need to comply with this act. While I do touch on some of these topics, I want to add just a brief disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a developer, I'm not a lawyer. There are a lot of legal aspects and implications that I'm not remotely qualified to advise on. If the EAA or similar legislation applies to you, or if you want to clarify what applies to you, the first step from your company should be to speak with a lawyer to make sure that you're getting accurate info to work with. So, what are some little steps that we can take? What are some small improvements that we can make, little things that we can do when we go back to work on Monday to make the web more accessible? To ensure that websites and apps are accessible, the World Wide Web Consortium developed a set of guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which you may have heard referred to as WCAG, or WCAG Guidelines, despite the fact that that's then guidelines twice. These guidelines are developed by industry professionals, some on their staff and some community members. All are developed publicly and openly. The most current version of these guidelines is WCAG 2.2, which was published in October 2023. And each version updates to take into account new technologies. For example, 2.1 introduced guidelines around animation and motion, while 2.2 introduced guidelines around drag and drop and authentication. Version 3 is being worked on at the moment and will incorporate additional guidelines around mobile devices and more improvements for cognitive impairments. These guidelines have 3 levels of conformance: A, AA, and AAA. Level A is basic accessibility. If you're not meeting this level, people with impairments will have serious issues or be incapable of using your product at all. AA then goes a step further and ensures that people with impairments can use your product, although it may not necessarily be convenient. If you're working towards an accessibility standard, this is likely what you're working towards. Finally, AAA is the highest level. This is typically met by organisations whose primary users are people with impairments. Whatever role you're in, it's worth knowing a bit about these guidelines, the very least that they exist, which congrats, you all do. So, and what level you have to meet and how to test against them. I'm pretty sure the Norwegian legislation is any public sector and government websites need to meet AA standard, but if you need to quote me on that, come and find me afterwards and I can fact check. If you are complying with the European Accessibility Act, their web requirements are based off of WCAG 2.1 AA standard with a few extra bits and pieces added. Once again, consult a lawyer, get an accessibility audit done if this does apply to you. There is also work being done to update the guidelines to WCAG version 2.2, so it doesn't hurt to get started on meeting the newer version if you are implementing changes. As I mentioned, WCAG 2.2 came out a while back, and there are a bunch of really great explainers that go through the guidelines and what the changes are. A little change can make a huge difference. Even better, if you're using a component library, there's a chance that one small fix can resolve hundreds or thousands of issues. So let's take a look again at the data from the WebAIM Million Audit. 50,960,288 accessibility issues. Of those, 96% are easily fixable. 96% could be fixed in the next hour or so. That's over 48 million issues that could be fixed with a small change. These issues were from insufficient colour contrast, missing alternative text on images, buttons and links that were empty or didn't include a label, missing labels on form inputs, and missing document language. The document language one is really interesting because that's literally first line of a HTML file. Doc type is such an easy fix, and nearly 1 in 5 websites that were tested were missing this. So that's something to quickly go and check when you get back to work, whether or not you've got the first line of the file. Color contrast compares the difference between background and text colors to ensure there's enough difference and they can be easily read. Almost 80% of the sites tested had areas with insufficient colour contrast. The WCAG guidelines have a minimum ratio of 4.5 to 1 to meet AA standard and 7 to 1 to meet AAA standard. And there are a bunch of really great tools that we can use to help determine the contrast. I really like using this one, Who Can Use, which not only calculates the difference between the two colours, but simulates several different vision impairments and compares them as well. For example, red and green may technically pass AA standard, has a ratio of 4.5 to 1. Apologies to any designers or visual people in the audience. I know it looks horrible. But if people have a type of colour blindness which affects red or greens, it may fail for them because there's not enough of a difference between the two colours. I also really like this tool, which is Accessible Brand Colours, because this allows you to put together a suite of brand colours and it tells you which colours you're able to use against one another. There are a bunch of really useful tools out there, and it's useful to know which colours can be used together and still pass the colour contrast guidelines. Having a text alternative is really important for your images. People who can't see the image may miss it, and screen readers or assistive technologies can't describe it to them. If a picture really is worth 1,000 words, that's a lot of content that these users are missing out on. 55.5% of the sites tested were missing alt text on images. If you don't have an image, if you don't have alt text on an image, the screen reader will read out the file name for the users, which for something like this isn't too bad. Doesn't give me too much information, but not too bad of a user experience. However, most of our images are not well named like this. They're automatically generated, hashed values, multi-directories deep, which is not remotely helpful and a very poor user experience when the screen reader tries to read this out to the user. Instead, we can add an alt attribute to the image to give the user information about the image. This doesn't necessarily mean describing the entire image, but describing the important parts of the image and the intent behind its inclusion on the page. If an image isn't conveying any information and is purely for presentational purposes, we can use an empty alt attribute to let assistive technologies know that it's not important and they'll ignore it altogether. As well as text descriptions for images, make sure that your other media has a text alternative as well. Videos and audio recordings can be given captions and transcripts. These are beneficial for people other than those with hearing impairments. For example, I much prefer watching videos with captions. They help me follow along with what's happening, which really annoys my husband, who works in film and TV, and apparently our very large 4K TV with a well-made movie on it is completely ruined by captions down the bottom of the page. I also like that if I don't have headphones, I can still watch a video with captions when I'm on public transport, or if I'm at a conference and there's really boring talk, so I'm just watching videos on my phone. If you're relying on graphs and charts, make sure that there's a text description for them as well, so that people who can't see them can still understand the information. You can use attributes like ARIA labeled by and ARIA described by, which allow you to link a description with a visual element like an image. The description doesn't need to be visually hidden either. It may be a paragraph content that already exists elsewhere on the page explaining it. And I want to touch quickly on ARIA attributes at this point, accessible rich internet applications. When building things accessibly, we often turn to using ARIA attributes. ARIA is a set of roles and attributes that the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, defined as part of the Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, to help make the web experience more accessible. This includes attributes like ARIA label and role. You may also have seen ARIA hidden or ARIA invalid, and includes a bunch of states and properties we can use to provide information for screen readers and assistive technologies. And while it is really useful to have this ability, the first rule of ARIA use is if you can use a native HTML element with the semantics and behavior already built in, instead of repurposing an element and adding an ARIA role, state, or property, then do so. This is literally the first rule as part of the ARIA guidelines. Don't use it if you don't have to. There are a lot of this functionality currently built in using semantic HTML. For example, we no longer need to give a div a role of navigation because we can just use a nav element instead. So have a think about when you're using ARIA attributes, is that the best use, or is there something else that already has these baked in? Make sure that your form inputs have labels associated with them. Even if the design doesn't display them, you can hide labels visually and keep them linked so that screen readers know what each input is. You can link labels with inputs using the for and ID attributes. The ID attribute is separate from the name and can be randomly generated so that it's unique on the page. The placeholder attribute, while it does display in the field, is not announced by or even recognized by screen readers, which is why we need to have the label as well. Of the tested websites, over 48% were missing labels on form inputs, which, given the fact that these were just home pages being tested, probably means a lot of search inputs which just need to have a hidden label being added to it. If you've got an existing pipeline for automating tests, have a look at integrating some accessibility testing in there. Start running validations and check to make sure that you're not introducing new issues. If you don't have one, I have a blog post on helping you get started with a testing pipeline in GitHub Actions, which includes some accessibility testing. It really helps to understand what people experience when using a screen reader as well. There are free or paid options, plus built in to Windows, Mac OS, Android, and iOS. So try opening up the screen reader, navigate around a web page, see what you can find, what you can do, what it tells you about what you can see on the page. If you're feeling up to it, try closing your eyes and see if you can work things out without actually seeing the screen. And anybody who hasn't used a screen reader, I have a bit of a demo here.
At level 4. DDD Brisbane is a non-profit community event. DDD Brisbane is currently link sponsorship at brisbane.com, link info at brisbane.com, link view the agenda.
You notice the JAWS repeats to me each character as I type it. That way
I have another demo.
I can hear it and I can backspace. And I can retype it again. Now I'll press enter. Oh, it says SLCC. It sounds like I'm on the right page. Okay, here we are on our home page, and I want to go to the accessibility page, the college's accessibility page. I don't know where that is on this screen.
So it's just a short snippet. Did anybody notice any difference between me using a screen reader and somebody who uses it every day using a screen reader? A little bit faster. They're a little bit faster, like just teeny tiny bit. unless we're using a screen reader on a daily basis, we're not able to replicate exactly how people are using it. But it is still really useful to get in the practice of using it, to see what content is being read, to see what you're able to do, and to see the kind of experience that people using screen readers are likely to get with your website. Get in the practice of using it, open it up, just see how you go, and where possible, investigate getting someone to come in and do screen reader testing where you can. I'm going to assume that you all know how important training and personal development is, given you're at a conference today, this week. You've given up your time this week to come and learn new things and to see some amazing speakers and presentations. There are plenty of options for training and upskilling around accessibility, so find one that works for you or your team in a format that works for them. Some people may prefer in-person workshops and conferences, some may prefer self-paced online, others may prefer books and blogs. Intopia is a digital agency that specialises in accessibility. They have a heap of different courses available online. These courses target different roles and teams as well, including designing, developing, content writing, testing, project management, app development, and more. So this is a really great place to go if you're looking at getting more accessibility training within your team. Sarah Sowerden has also created a really great accessibility course, which is available online and was released a couple of years ago. It's targeted at developers and designers and is a really great resource. And subtle plug, I also have a workshop that covers accessibility and accessibility testing more in depth for developers and designers. I did do it earlier this week. Hopefully it might be back next year. If you're interested, you can keep an eye out then. I also want to make a quick note about accessibility overlays and widgets. These are often used as a quick fix to try and make a website accessible. Not only do they not fix things and not make a website accessible, in many cases they actually make it significantly worse and override any existing settings that users may have. They can open a site up to security concerns and potential data breaches. And there's a really great fact sheet about it at overlayfactsheet.com, which includes quotes of support by accessibility experts all over the world. A couple of resources to go through. I will share these out as well, and I'll chuck the link to my slides in the Slack. I have a bunch of accessibility resources that I've basically just put a whole bunch of bookmarks in together, because otherwise I spend the entire time sharing links. So I highly recommend checking that out. That's most of the stuff I've gone through today, and a whole bunch of other things that I just use on a regular basis. So, to finish up, accessibility is not a nice to have. It is not a we'll get to it later, and it is not an additional feature. Accessibility is important, and it makes a huge difference in the lives of billions of people. And inaccessibility excludes them from the technology that makes the rest of our lives easier. It excludes those people from being a part of society, and it tells them that they are not welcome. Accessibility isn't just for the 1.2 billion people with permanent impairments. It helps all of us and makes all of our lives better. Accessibility helps us every day, even if we may not realize it. And most importantly, we can all play a part in making our website, our products, and our technologies more accessible. We can all make a change, take a small step, learn one little thing that can make a big difference to somebody who relies on accessibility to just exist in a technology-dependent world. Thank you very much.